everybody, it's Julie the Whippy Chick here, and this is my bub, as my friend in Canada, Jamie, likes to call it. My bub is my butt ugly blanket. She did not name it the butt ugly blanket. She just gave me the acronym. I named it the butt ugly blanket. Jamie would never say anything so mean as to say my blanket was butt ugly. Okay, so I've had a few people ask me about this particular stitch pattern. It is called the Granny Ripple, and today's tutorial I am going to show you how to make the Granny Ripple. So super easy, especially if you're familiar with using any type of granny cluster stitch, either granny stripes or granny squares, anything like that. Yeah, so let's get started. All right, let's put this away and I will get out some scrap yarn and yeah, we'll get started. Okay, so let's get started. First, you might want to know I am using not Premier Basics. I love Premier Basics, so I tend to say that all the time. I'm using Premier Just Yarn worsted from the Dollar Tree. Love that store. Medium 4-weight yarn. It does recommend a 5mm hook. I'm actually using a 6mm hook, and in my blanket I used the same size yarn, and a lot of times I used the same actual yarn. It was a scrap blanket, so there's all different size or all different colors of the 4-weight yarn, but I actually used a much bigger hook. I used a size K, which I think is around a 7mm. I really tried hard to figure out exactly what size that hook is, millimeter speaking. So there is a video which I will link up here in the cards, because it's kind of funny that I was really struggling to figure out how many millimeters the size K hook was. Anyway, not that any of that's important. I am using a 6mm hook today by Susan Bates. Love these hooks. I am going to start with a chain. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And I'm going to chain multiples of 18. Okay, I'm going to use 36 just for tutorial purposes, but you are going to want to use a lot more than 36, believe me. And I will leave a list here of different multiples of 18, so that might help you figure out what size you want to use. For tutorial purposes, I am going to use 36, and the multiples are 18 plus 6. So once you get to your multiple, whatever that is, in my case it's going to be 36, then you're going to add 6 more chains to it. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and chain up. So there's 1, 2, 3,
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35,
and 36. So now I have my 36 chains on here. So now that I've got my multiple of 18, I'm going to go ahead and add an additional 6, and that is going to be for my turning and my first stitch. So it'll make sense, I promise. Let's go ahead and do our remaining 6. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now to start row 1, we are not going to build into the very first chain. We are going to build into the 6th chain from the hook. So let's count those together. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we are going to build into this chain, and we are going to do 3 double crochets into that chain. So yarn over, insert your hook, pull up a loop, pull through 2, and pull through 2. That's the first double crochet. We're going to put 2 more double crochets into that same chain. These are going to get a little stretched out and wonky looking. maybe they'll be stressed too, but that's okay. So just go ahead and put 2 more double crochets into that same chain. So now we have 2 and the last. And there's our last one. Okay. Now we are going to skip 2 chains. There's 1, there's 2. We're going to skip those. We're not doing anything with those chains, and we are going to do the exact same thing into the next chain. Okay, so we're going to build 3 double crochets into that chain. Everything gets so wonky in the first row. Be patient with yourself and take your time. There's 1. There's 2. And here's 3. Okay. Now we are going to skip 2. There's 1, there's 2, and we are going to build another cluster. That's what these things are called, another cluster into that chain. So skip 2 and 3 double crochets into that chain. Whoops. Let's see how many times my yarn slips off my hook during this tutorial. Happens every time. Okay. So now we've done that 3 times. I'm just going to take a break here for a second because I want to show you something really quick. I did one of these earlier, and I want to show you. So if you look, what we're doing is we're building these mountains and valleys, okay? We've got valleys and mountains. I think I have it actually upside down. So what you're going to do is pretend that we're going down the mountain in this part. And now we're going to make the valley. See, we have our valley here. Up here we have our mountain peak, and down here we have our valley. So we're going to do our valley now. So instead of skipping 2 chains, we are going to skip 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and we're going to build 3 double crochet clusters into that same stitch. 3 double crochet stitches, I'm sorry, to make a cluster. So there's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. Now it's not super obvious yet, but that is going to be our valley. Okay, so we came down the mountain, now we're going to climb up the mountain. Okay, we're going to climb up to our peak. So we're going to skip 2 chains, 1, 2, and we're going to build 3 double crochets into the next chain to build our cluster. So here's 1, here's 2, and here's 3. There's always 3 up and 3 down. We had our 3 coming down, 1, 2, 3. Now we're working our way up, so we've got 1, 2. We're going to need to build 1 more on our way up. So once again, we're going to skip 2 chains and build 3 double crochets in the next chain. So here's 1. Here's 2. And here's 3. Okay, so I'm just going to grab my example again. I can show you what it's like when we get to the top. Here's our valley, and here's our peak. We've got 1, 2, 3, and we're up at our peak now. So what we're going to do to form this peak is we're going to chain 3, and then we're going to build 3 more double crochets again into that same stitch. Okay, so now we're at our peak of our mountain. We've made it to the top. We're going to chain 3, 2, 3, and now we're doing 3 more double crochets into this exact same chain. So here's 1, here's 2, and here's 3. And don't worry that these are getting all stretched out. It's not a problem. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3 going up. Now we've started going down. So we've got 1, we need to build 2 more going down. So once again, we're going to skip 2 chains, and our chains are going to get a little tighter and closer together because we're stretching out the other ones, so that makes these ones a little tighter. So there's 1, there's 2. So I'm going to build 3 double crochets into that next chain. Just count your chains. Make sure you're not skipping over any by mistake because like I said, they are getting tighter and closer together as we stretch out the other ones. Tightens up the ones we haven't worked into. Okay, so we've got 1, 2. We need to make 1 more cluster on our way down. So skip 1, there's 1, skip 2, there's the second one. We're going to build into that 3rd chain with our double crochets. It's always the double crochet cluster. Here's 1. Here's 2. And here's 3. Okay, so we've come down the mountain. Our little guy, he's come down the mountain. And when we get to the bottom of the mountain, what do we have to do? We have to make another valley. So do you remember what we did when we made this valley? We skipped 5 chains. So we're going to skip 5 more chains. Let's count them out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to skip those 5, build into the next one with 3 double crochet cluster. Just trying to make it interesting, folks. There's 1 and 2 and 3. Very good. All right, now we're working back up the hillside again. We've got 1, 2 that we're skipping. Build 3 double crochets into that next stitch. Next chain. There's 1. There's 2. Oops. And there's 3. Okay, working our way back up the hill. It's starting to get a zigzag to it. Starting. That works out more once you get more rows in. Okay, so we need to skip 2, 1, 2, and we're going to build into our last chain. And actually, it looks like I have 2 chains, which means I either miscounted or I skipped too many or I didn't skip enough. Somewhere my count got off. It is not the end of the world. Just fudge it. No big deal. Okay, so I'm going to skip 2 and I'm going to build into this stitch. And whoops. Get in there, get in there. Okay. There's 1. There's 2. And there's 3. Now, this is where it got tricky for me when I was first learning to do the granny ripple. If you notice, we came down, we have a valley. We came up and made a peak. We came down and made a valley. Now we're up again and we need to make a peak. So in order to make that peak, we still have to finish it. We have to go ahead and do our 3 chains and then another cluster into that same stitch. So we're going to chain 3. I know this seems a little odd, but believe me, it is necessary. So there's 3. Now we're going to do another cluster of 3 double crochets right into that same stitch. There's 1. There's 2. And there's 3. Okay, and you see I do have an extra chain here. Like I said, it's no big deal. You can always just untie this knot and kind of tie it off, or just weave it in, whatever you want to do. I'm not going to stress it. I never stress it unless it's really crazy bad. I don't worry about it. Okay, so that is the end of round 1. I'm going to take a little bit of a break and then I will come right back and we will start row 2. Not round, row 2. Okay, I'll see you in a minute. Okay, I am back with row 2. Let's get our tail out of the way here. Get your tail out of the way. Okay, for row 2 and every row after, you are going to always finish on a peak with this particular pattern. If you're following this pattern, you're always going to finish on a peak, and then to start the next row, you're always going to chain up 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and turn your work. I always chain up and then turn my work. Some people turn their work and then chain. It's really up to you. That's just my own preference. Okay, so now we're at the top of our mountain and we need to work our way back down. We are going to build a cluster in each of these spaces in between, okay? That is why we had to have this space created at the top, because we have to build into it, okay? But we're not building into it with 2 clusters, we're just building into it with 1. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how I do that. Okay, so we've chained up our 5. We're going to double crochet into this nice big space that we've made. So we've got 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so that is our first cluster going down the hill, down the mountain. We're going to put another cluster into this next space. So here's 1. There's no chains or anything in between, okay? There's 2, and there's 3 for our second cluster. The next one goes into this space. So there's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. The nice thing about this is you're always building into these nice big spaces. You're not like looking for stitches individually after you get through that first row. So it does make the project go really fast. Okay, so we are down into the valley. We've made our way down into the valley, into the valley. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we are not going to build into the valley. We are going to skip it. We're skipping the valley. We're going to skip right across to the other side, okay? We're going to pretend we're making a bridge. We're just going to go right across. We don't need to chain or anything like that. We're just going to jump right across. Okay, so with that yarn over, we're going to do our double crochet cluster, granny cluster. So that looks a little weird at first, I know, but trust me, that is how we make our zigzag chevron look, our little ripple look. Okay, so there's our cluster. Now we're working our way back up the hill. So we're going right back into the next space with a double crochet cluster. 1, 2, 3, and we're almost to the top of the mountain already. Can you believe it? Here's our peak. Take a look. We've come down the mountain. We're working our way back up. We're almost to the peak. Okay, so double crochet at the top. A double crochet cluster. 1, 2, and 3. And because we are at the top, we are going to chain 3. 1, 2, 3, and do another cluster into that same space. So we are making another peak. There's 1. There's 2. And there's 3. And you see our nice pointy peak. Okay. Down the mountain, up the mountain. Now we are going back down the mountain. We've got our first cluster on the way down. We're going to put another cluster here and another cluster here before we create our little bridge to go across the valley. I hope all of this is making sense. Insert. There's 1 double crochet cluster. There's 2. And there's 3. So there's our second cluster. 1 more. There's 1. There's 2. And there's 3. Now we are back down the mountain. We are down in the valley. We're gonna cross the valley by just jumping right over into that next cluster. We're skipping the valley. We're gonna make a little bridge, just like we did here, and go straight across. I tend to kind of pull that a little tighter when I do that. Kind of makes it a little pointier. Okay, well, next spot, going back up the mountain. Whoops, well, that's two times that it has slipped off my hook. Happens every time I do a tutorial. Okay, there's one. There's two. And there's three. And now, this is where it gets a little weird until you get used to it. Remember, at the end of our row, we are at a peak. So we have to create another peak here. Okay, so here's our space that we're going to build into. Do a cluster, just like usually. There's two. Whoops. Here's three. And we are going to make a peak. So we're going to chain 3, 2, 3, and we're going to do, oh, that makes 3 times it's fallen off my hook. Okay, so we've got our 1/2 of our peak, we've got our chain 3, and now we're going to build another cluster into that same space to make our end peak. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so we are at the end of row 2. We're definitely starting to get more of our zigzag shape going. I'm going to start row 3. And if you remember row 2, I said we always start by chaining up 5. Every row starts and ends with a peak and starts by chaining up 5. So there's 4, there's 5. Turn your work. Now, we are going to start working into our peak, but we're not creating a new peak. We're going to go down the mountain, okay? So, let's start with 1 cluster. Start with 1 cluster, end with 2. I don't know if that helps. I just think of it as you need to have a cluster in each little space. So we've got 1 in that space. We're going to put 1 in this space. 1 in this space. Oh, my yarn all of a sudden is getting really tight in the ball. Stretch it out here a little. Okay, so second cluster on our way down. 2 and 3. Next one. 1, 2, and 3. So now we are back down in the valley. Back down here in the valley. We're going to skip over. Remember, we're going to make our little bridge and connect from here to here. We're skipping over our valley. Okay. So there's 1. There's 2. There's 3. Now we're working our way back up. Next cluster. Whoa, that makes 4 times it slipped off my hook. Boy, that might be a record. I must have a slippy hook. Okay, there's 1. There's 2. There's 3. Now we're getting up to the peak. There's 1. There's 2. There's 3. And because we are at the top of the peak, we're going to chain 3. 1, 2, 3. And we're going to do another cluster in the same space. 1, 2, and 3. Now we're working our way down into the valley. There's 1, 2, 3. One more till we get to the valley. 1, 2, 3. We are down to the valley. Down in the valley so low. Okay, you didn't come here to listen to me sing. We're gonna make our bridge. We're gonna skip our valley, make our bridge, and just jump right over into here. Okay, no chaining or anything, just go right into it. Double crochets. 1 and 2 and 3. Very good. Next chain space. Actually, it's not a chain space, it's just a space. 1, 2, and 3. Now we are at our last space on this row. So remember, it is a peak. Take a look and see. We're on our way back up. So this is a peak. We need to create a peak here. Create a peak. Okay. So 1 and 2 and 3. And to create our peak, remember what we do? We chain 3. And then we create another exact same cluster into that same space. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, that completes row 3. And now you can see we are definitely getting our zigzag shape here. It always looks a little weird when you first put that in, but it evens out. It does even out and it makes a straight line. I know it looks really wonky when you first do it and you think this can't be right, but you just have to trust me that it is. From there, you're going to do your chain up 5, 3, 4, 5, turn your work. And remember, when you work on your way back on your first, you just do 1 cluster in that space. You don't do 2 on the way back. At the end of the row, you do 2. At the beginning of the row, you just do 1 cluster. Okay? If you get confused, just rewind and watch again and follow along until you really truly get it. Okay? Okay, and I just really wanted to point out what I say is true. You see how it does line up. It does make a nice line. Even though it looks really weird while you're doing it, as soon as you get a couple rows in, you see that it does make a nice line on either side. Oops, oops. Sorry, it's kind of wide. Here's the other side. You see? Nice and straight. All right, and that is the trickiest part, I think, of this whole pattern. That is the part that always tripped me up, was turning on the ends, getting that all figured out. All right, I really, really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. There are other Granny Ripple tutorials out there, so thank you so much for choosing mine. I really, really appreciate it. And if you'd like to check out some other videos, just stick around to the end of this one, and there'll be some playlists for you to click on. Thanks again for all your support and for showing up today. I really appreciate it, and I'd love to see the beautiful projects you make. And if you'd love to show them to me, as much as I'd love to see them, go ahead and check out the Facebook group, the Whippy Chick Crochet Connections Facebook group, where you can post all of your pictures of your beautiful projects, because I'd really, really love to see them. Okay, everybody, have a great, great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Goodbye.